Call the meeting of March 14, 2013, Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Mr. Hamner, could I get you to lead us in the pledge, please?
Certainly.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Hamner. And we welcome Maria Calderon, our newest member, who's in attendance tonight. Welcome. The reason that I'm starting the meeting is because our chairman, Mr. Zimmerman, is absent, excused from today's meeting. There is currently no vice chairman. So the first matter of business today will be to elect a vice chairman to run this meeting and any other meetings in the absence of the chairman. I open the floor to nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to make a nominate George Hamner.
Second.
There's been a nomination by Mr. Brugnano and a second by Mr. May for George Hamner. Are there any other nominations? I close
9 anyway.
I close the floor to nominations. All those in favor of Mr. Hamner as vice chair, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Well, I thank you so much.
There's the tools of the trade.
All right. Maria, nice to have you on board. Thank you. And not to hurt anybody, we've got a long and tedious agenda tonight. I hope not. But first item is the approval of minutes from the last meeting. I need a motion and a second or any changes anybody wants.
Move we approve.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We have 2 public hearings tonight. The first one is North County Charter Elementary Schools request to rezone .94 acres. Before we do that, this is quasi-judicial. Has any board member had any contact with anyone that would be conflicting? Has anybody and whoever would like to speak on the issue, which if you could stand to be sworn in, we would appreciate it.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, who's going to take this?
I will.
Jashan.
Good evening. Sasan Rohani, Chief of Long Range Planning. As you mentioned, there's 2 public hearings tonight. The first one is a rezoning, and actually this is very simple rezoning. This is for North County Charter School, and they're requesting to change the zoning from CH, which is heavy commercial, to CL, which is a light commercial, limited commercial. The property located on Old Dixie Highway, about 700 feet north of 65th Street. The whole reason for this rezoning request is that the Charter Elementary School, North County Charter Elementary School, they want to expand their campus. And their current location, which is immediately north of this property, zone CL, and schools are permitted under CL. But the property that they want to go to expand is CH, therefore they need to apply and get a rezoning to be able to do that. In the map here, you could see that the property location is right in here. To the north of it is CL, which is the North County Charter Elementary School. To the east and south, the property zone CH, and has several different commercial facilities. To the west, which is separated by Old Dixie and also by the FEC Railroad, there is a PD and contain a golf course. And again, if proposed rezoning approved, this is going to be the rezoning, and then which is going to be the continuation of the zoning to the north. Like any other rezoning, we look at all these criteria. As far as the concurrency, they meet all the concurrency requirement at this point, and also at time of the development, of course, there would be a detailed concurrency review. As far as consistency with the comprehensive plan, this rezoning is consistent with the comprehensive plan. We look at all the applicable policy and noted here a couple of the policies, and also the land use for the property is commercial industrial, which is consistent too. As far as the environmental impact, there's not going to be any different impact between CH and CL, and they're both the same, and the property is actually clear. There's no impact, no adverse impact. As far as the compatibility, to the north is a charter school that they're going to expand. Actually, what they're proposing to put in this property is their playground and recreation area and maybe some parking. That's all they're going to do. Property to the east and south, they are commercial, which is the no compatibility issue, and property to the west is a golf course and also separated from this property by Old Dixie and FEC railroad track. In conclusion, the CR requested zoning is compatible with the surrounding area, consistent with the comprehensive plan, meet concurrency test, and there is no additional environmental impact. Therefore, staff would support it, and staff recommends that you recommend that the Board of the County Commissioner approve the rezoning to change it from CH, heavy commercial, to CL, limited commercial. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasan. The notices, what's the distance, and was there any comment at all from any neighbor?
No, we send the notices to everybody, and I haven't received any comment from.
Any questions of Sasan?
One here. The west side of the property bounds Old Dixie.
Yes.
And right now, there's a 60-foot right-of-way. It requires another 45 feet for right-of-way, so that's 105 feet. Is that available, and does it have any adverse effect on the proposed change?
Would not have any adverse effect on the change of the zoning, but also they had to go through the site planning. At the time of the site planning, if there's any need for extra right-of-way, that's the time that they would get the right-of-way and would work with the applicant at that point. But for the rezoning, there's no adverse impact.
Any other questions? Would anyone from the applicant care to be heard?
Good evening, Joseph Scholke, Biddle and Stoddard, Vero Beach, Florida. I don't have anything to add other than we concur with staff report. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Anybody have questions of the applicant? If not, we'll open the public hearing. Anyone in the public in our packed audience care to speak? Okay, public hearing is closed. Gentlemen, we have a motion
Motion to approve?
We have a motion to approve. Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Okay, it carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, next item, whoops, I've lost the agenda. Next item, I think, Sasan, you have two. This is Vero
Yes.
Estates LLC's request to amend the text of the future land use element of the county's comp plan. This is this is legislative, therefore no swearing in will be necessary, correct? Correct. I hadn't forgotten.
Correct.
Okay, go ahead, Sasan. Tonight, Sasan.
Technology. Okay, the next item is a comprehensive plan text amendment to revise some of the requirement of the policy 5.6 of the future land use element. I know that you guys are familiar with this thing, but the land use amendment is a very involved process. There's 3 public hearings, and 2 times through the process, we have to send everything to the state and
Maria's in for a treat.
review agencies. And this is the first public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission. At this point, you can either recommend for the Board of the County Commissioner to approve it or deny it, then would go to Board of County Commissioner, we send it to a state, would come back, then we would address any concern, take it to the board for a final public hearing, and then send it back to the state. As I mentioned, the purpose of these changes to revise a couple of the requirements in policy 5.6. Policy 5.6 is a policy in our plan that would actually dictate the requirement for a mixed use in residential area. And the purpose is to change some requirement for the use and some requirement for the timing. I would get to this a little bit later. But let me give you a little bit of background, why we are here and so forth. In June of last year, the applicant came here and applied for a change of the land use in property at the northeast corner of County Road 510 and 66th Avenue. When staff reviewed that request, we find that it's not consistent with some of the comprehensive plan policy and we recommended denial. It came to you on October 25th, and that meeting you decided to table these requests. After that, staff and applicant, they met to find out what are the options for developing this property. Staff acknowledged that limited commercial is appropriate for the site, but to change the whole site to the new commercial node was not. Also, staff mentioned that it could be developed as a mixed use, but also staff told the applicant if there are some criteria in a mixed use that need to be revised, we are amenable to look at it and bring it forward to you and to the Board of County Commissioners. The policy 5.6, which is again for mixed use in residentially designated land, when we were doing our last evaluation appraisal report in 2008, that policy, we put them together and we had lots of workshops, lots of people, they were all in favor of it. Then in 2010, when we did the comprehensive plan amendment for those evaluation appraisal report, then it put to our comprehensive plan. This policy has lots of requirements that specify what could happen in these mixed-use area. And also, if you read the policy with the attachment 2 of the staff report, these mixed use, they are only applicable to residential area that they're along the major roadway in the county. And this amendment would not change anything. Also, like any similar policies, this is a policy that is not for only one side. Any side that they are residentially designated along the major roadway in the county that specifically mentioned in that policy, they could use this policy and requirement. The policy would mention what kind of mixes of uses would be allowed in those mixed-use development. For commercial, policy indicate that lodging, institutional uses, office use, retail, personal service, and restaurant uses are allowed. Applicant is specifically requesting to add in parentheses in front of the retail that also the fuel use is a permitted use, should be a permitted. This is their request. Also, the policy 5.6 has some safeguard to make sure, because these are the residentially designated land, these are not commercial land. Therefore, we wanted to make sure that it's not being used for just a standalone commercial and actually going to be mixed use, mix of the residential and commercial. That's why we put some requirement for a timing. Current policy is saying that no commercial development could happen unless 25% of the residential is developed. The applicant is requesting that we would let them do at least 2.5 acres of the commercial before any residential development. As far as the fuel sale is concerned, staff actually look at this one, and we really think that the fuel sale could be appropriate for the neighborhood commercial. Actually, we think that maybe convenience store with a gas pump and so forth could be an anchor that bring the customer to that facility, and the other users that they are there, they could use this one. However, we have to make sure that when you talk about fuel cells and gas station and this kind of thing, you are talking the automobile and so forth, but also in the mixed use, we would like to have it such that the people that they live in the general area, they could walk to these facilities. Therefore, there should be a balance between the two need of the automobile versus, the pedestrian. Also, because of the nature of these, then project design become very important. However, staff really think that the fuel use is acceptable, and we support the changes for that one. As far as the timing is concerned, originally when we put together this policy, we were thinking that at least we have to have some residential build before the commercial, again, to safeguard and not having a standalone commercial. But it could be some other option, like the option that they are proposing to have some of the commercial first and then residential. In this case, you are only talking about 2.5 acres of the commercial, but also any development after that 2.5 acres, they still have to meet that 25% of the residential being developed. Therefore, staff think that is acceptable. Especially as you all know that with the change of economy, sometimes the market dictates that you have to do more commercial or more residential. This would provide the flexibility to do whatever needed. To do any comprehensive plan amendment, we have to make sure it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. And the most important policy is policy 14.3, that's saying one of these 4 criteria should be met in order to approve a comp plan. In this case, we really think that it meets the first criteria, and that's the oversight when we put together this policy. Therefore, this request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Also, after this meeting, we are planning to take it to the Board of the County Commissioner on April 9th. At that point, if the Board of the County Commissioner decide to send it to the state and regional review agencies, then staff would start drafting the land development regulation amendment for the same changes that we do here to the comp plan. And then staff would bring those things to you before the final review by the Board of the County Commissioner, and most likely we would take both LDR amendment and comp plan amendment to one meeting for the board to approve the whole thing. With that said, staff recommend that you recommend to the Board of the County Commissioner to amend the policy 5.6 as requested by the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasan. Any questions of staff? Mr. Day?
Yeah, and in your analysis, you say early on in the analysis about policy 5.6, you say that the policy was structured to be somewhat restrictive, and I assume that I could insert the policy was purposely structured to be somewhat restrictive. And then later on in the analysis, you say the policy was structured to be too restrictive. And so my question is, what has changed between the time the policy was first structured when it was purposely structured to be restrictive and now? What has changed between these two times?
I don't think there's been any change. I think we just recognized that we were a little too strict there, that we knew at the time, say particularly with the timing aspect of this, that there are a number of options. It's kind of like a hierarchy of ways that we could implement a timing restriction. And what we did is, in looking back, we realized that we structured it to be on the very strictest end. And when we looked, actually, I think what's happened is when we actually get a real project in and we start doing it, start looking at it with respect to the policy, we see some opportunities for changes. Even though we do try to test drive the policies during the development process, it's a lot different when we actually have a project. So I think that's the impetus.
In our discussion, way back when, in '06 or whenever it was that we were doing it's been a while back that everybody was very sensitive about putting commercial in a development. We didn't have this at all. So when they stuck their toe in the water, they was talked about there was a minimalistic approach. I don't know from the candidate, but in all candor, when you start thinking about intersections and corners, 2.5 acres to me is fairly restrictive too. I'm personally, when I read this, and the candidate has talked about it, but I mean, this probably 5 acres is really more realistic if you're going to develop it. But the point is that they were worried about this development in this area, and this particular corner has been fairly sensitive, but there's no commercial development at all in that area. So if you were ever going to be less restrictive, to me, this corner would be the one to be less restricted in. Now, every time I go from 2.5 to 5 and I say 10, you'll see Bob frown over there because he knows that he wants other toe. He doesn't want to measure the water with both feet in it, So at any rate, that's what I remember. Any other questions? Okay, would the candidate care to be, or the candidate's engineer care to be heard?
Ladies and
Candidate
gentlemen,
care to be heard?
now we have a lady on the dais here. My name is Joseph Paladin. I'm president of Black Swan Consulting. I represent Vero Lake Estates. And back in October, a few months ago, we were back here and we worked quite hard and couldn't come to a decision on for or against. So y'all instructed us to go back with Mr. Keating and sit down and try and work out something we could all agree on, come here on the same page. And we've done that. And Mr. Keating and staff has worked very hard with us, and we've worked very hard with them, and we've given in some things, and they've helped us redesign some things. And we support almost 100% of what was brought forward today by staff. We support these changes, and this will allow us to go forward. The only thing that I would ask, if you could extend a little bit, would be that 2.5 acres. If you could extend that to like 3 acres for me, that would give me a little better area to design what I'm trying to do to bring in under this criteria. That's the only change I would ask for. I would support everything else that has been brought up. If I could just get that other 1/2 acre, that would help me a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Paladin. Any questions of the applicant?
Is that within our power to extend it to 3.5 acres? or 3
Absolutely.
acres?
Yes, it is.
This is a proposal from us to the Board of County Commissioners to move ahead. Any other questions of the applicant or
I was going to
comments?
ask Bob a question.
Sure.
Would it be too much to ask for 3, or?
No, I think that we
Is it
can accept.
reasonable?
Right? Yeah.
Okay. Not to interrupt, but I think in order to do this right, and Mr. Keating is going to support this, we have to change the percentage in order to be allowed that 3 acres, right, Bob? So the wording has to be correct.
You can do, the percentage can be the same
Right.
and/or, I think. You can do
Yeah.
a minimum of,
But on our side, we would need that percentage to cover my 3 acres. As long as you word it so the percentage covers my 3 acres, I'm fine. Okay, Bob?
Yeah.
We have a 10-acre site, and right now the L2 is limited to 25% if you go
I
mixed
see.
use.
Yeah. Okay, I was
Regardless
thinking
of
it
how
was
much you're allowed to
20.
develop up
I
front.
got you.
So that was the other number we need to provide.
okay, Bob, you may think about that for a minute while we open the public hearing. And would anyone care to speak on this from the public? Mr. Barquette, nice to have you here tonight, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I almost forgot how to get here. It's been a while. I support the application as well. I represent 2 property owners, and the properties that I represent are 27 and 37 acres, and 2.5 acres is something, but I would like to see 5 acres or maybe a 25% or something like that. We argued strenuously for something like this at the time this mixed-use policy was adopted, and we pointed out this policy will not be used unless you allow the commercial to go first, because the commercial has to lead in the residential, but we couldn't get anywhere with the staff. But unfortunately, Bob made a good point. It's true that when you march out a new ordinance, sometimes you have to test the waters and see how it works, and when a project comes in, you modify the ordinance accordingly. So that is correct.
This was testy at the time, as I remember. So.
I agree, but I would certainly support 3 acres. I would like to see, like you said, up to 5 acres. That'd be great. And especially for the larger sites. Like I said, my clients are 27 and 37 acres in size, and they're both on State Road 60, where, no offense, but nobody's going to develop residential right on State Road 60. They're going to put it in the back, and you're going to have some commercial in the front to lead it in. So, thank you.
Okay.
Well, I think he's completely wrong. You've got a bunch of projects that are residential right on State Road 60. I mean, you got Vista Plantation, you got Club at Vero.
I don't think that's what he meant. I think his implication was that if you're on a bigger property on 60, then the commercial side, probably proportionately speaking, would be higher or a little slightly more intensive as you went along from here. So, would be my interpretation of it. But yeah, Bill.
Chairman. Bob, why 2.5 acres versus 25%? I mean, to be fair, if you had a 5-acre parcel, that would be half. I mean, if you had a larger parcel.
No, actually, you have to look at the total parcel and then give the percentage that can be commercial. Right. If you're in L1 or L2, it can be up to 25% of the parcel.
If I could just speak to the 2.5 acres, and just for the record, Stan Bowling, Planning Director, I think the idea between the staff had was to allow a developer to put in convenience type of retail, or maybe what would be equivalent to an out parcel if you were to later do a larger development, maybe even 2 out parcels with 2.5 acres. We pulled project plans, projects that have been built with convenience stores and a little bit of retail and say 8 to 10 fueling positions. And those projects tended to be 1.5 to maybe a little over 2 acres. So we gave a little bit of cushion actually to get to 2.5. For that size, convenience retail, maybe an out parcel or 2, and maybe a shopping center sort of thing would come later. And the idea was to not allow all the commercial development potential to be built up front, but to allow, at least to get some cash flow if, commercial is what was really demanded at that point in time to put that in. And the convenience retail would fit in with the residential area around the project, and then ultimately what's built in the project. So that was the reasoning for the 2.5 acres.
What projects did you look at?
Several that were convenience stores, again with some retail and pumps at intersections.
If you were at L1 and L2, L1 is 3 units per acre, and so an L2 would be multi or higher 6.
Yeah.
I mean, it would seem to me, as your density increases, wouldn't it make sense to increase that percentage? I mean, maybe you have a 1% for L1 and 1 for L2, because if you really want, if you're putting mixed use in, if you attract people with what's there and then you build around it, it has always made a lot of sense to me to do that. I know that when we were doing this, you didn't want to have to do it that way, but
no, that's what's in there. There's a higher percent of the project area that can be commercial with M1 and M2 compared to L1 and L2.
Right.
L1 and L2 have 1%.
Okay, but L2 is in the 6. I thought it was higher density than L1. So
right, the L1 and L2 are treated the same. They're 3 and 6.
And what's the next step up?
M1 and M2, which are 8 and 10.
I know, but I mean, what's the percentage difference?
It's up to 30%.
Okay, because I'm thinking 30% on the L1, L2 myself, but.
Well, if you want, we can do what Mr. Paladin suggested. We can just take out the differentiations and have L1, L2, M1, and M2 treated the same.
Which would mean 30%
Right.
basically,
Right.
and or 3 acres minimum and whatnot. That's what I mean, I'm thinking, because I even on small projects, there's a certain amount of land you really need to do, and I think we're splitting hairs as to whether we are in the face of residential development or not. As a personal note here. Anyone else?
Well, I think we really struggled with this back in October, and I think what needed to happen, happened. I think if it had come to a vote in October, I could have seen it going either way, and so I think that you needed to regroup, and you did regroup. You needed to discuss it, you did discuss it, and I'm certainly in favor of what you propose with the added acreage that you request.
Thank you.
Any other comments? or questions of the staff or the applicant? Public hearing is, did I open it or not? I can't, I'm getting old, I can't remember. I opened the public hearing. I think the public is now spoken. Public hearing's closed. That's why we haven't done this for a while, right? Okay, gentlemen, we need a motion. The indication has been that maybe we do put the L1, L2, M1, M2 together, use 30% as the base minimum, and/or up to, is it 3 acres instead of 2.5 as a minimum? You know.
I'd like to make a motion.
Yeah, I motion did you want to?
No, please, if you...
I motion that we accept staff's position with the modifications we've discussed tonight.
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Under discussion, there has been a request for 5 acres. I don't know how to word the 5. I personally happen to agree on the bigger the project, you know, there's a proportion. It's what Bill indicated. There's a proportion here. But as long as if you go 30%, and I don't explain this to me, if we take this in and go M2 on what Bruce is talking about at 30%, and he's on 30 acres, does that not take him to 9 acres? But are you saying he can only develop 3 of the 9 that he can develop?
Until he does some residential, yeah. We still think that mixed use should mean mixed use.
Would it be in order to try and follow this progression in size, if we had the 30% 3-acre minimum, could we not say or up to 50% of your designated amount at the same time, which would cover both small and large, which would mean that in the case of 9, he could go to 4.5 rather than the 3, or in the case of the smaller piece, they can go at least to 3 as an addition.
Well, I don't recommend it now. I recommend staying with the 3.
We have staff's recommendation. My thought is that you split the baby there as you get larger. If you have a 30% with a 3-acre minimum, that covers 5, 10 smaller acreage. But if you actually get to bigger property, that would allow for like 9 acres of commercial. They could do 50% if we added an addendum that said 50% into that, which would scale it up as you went out. Now, staff, they don't like that, but realistically, if you think about development in a bigger piece of property, it probably makes more sense. But
I'd like to add to Dr. Day's motion that anything 9 acres above a commercial use, that they can...
Well, it's not 9, it'd be 30%. The way it reads is 30% minimum of 3. You can do 3 acres
right,
without
correct.
question, but you could if you were above the 3, if you or 50% of your designated amount.
That's fine. Well,
Would be my recommendation. You all can, Bob doesn't like it. Is that in the form of an additional motion?
That's what I was attempting to do before.
Help me. We word that as
that would be, there's a motion and a
on
second.
The floor and a second.
Dr. Day.
If you would accept that as in the first motion, then we could carry it on. I can't add to it. Okay.
Mr. Day would have to accept the amendment to his motion, and then it would have to be accepted as far as the second is concerned as well.
And Bob, you're not happy with that?
No,
And why not?
because I still think we need to make sure that these aren't standalone commercial projects, and the
Bob,
more
if you've got
acreage
30
you can
acres
get,
of property,
Right.
just bear with me. If you've got 30 acres of property that can be developed into 9 acres of commercial, and you grant 50% of 9 acres, it's 4.5 acres. You're not
Right.
going to develop 4.5 acres of 30 and be done and walk away. That's just not going to happen.
I still think 3 is fine.
Okay. The public hearing is closed, gentlemen. Y'all sit down. We're done. That's the anti part of me at vice chairman here. Okay. Jonathan, would you accept that?
I think at this stage, we're talking about this specific development.
But no, this is a land use.
Right.
Bob is correct about one thing. This is kind of like it's a land use amendment. This goes countywide.
Right.
It was brought up by one land. This is a little bit like the mobile home, the storage thing. It's mobile. It's countywide. What you're talking about is in a county, so it does affect the whole county. This is back in the old days of the discussion. It's just, to me, from what I consider common sense, the bigger the property, you do limit that, you square up, and you're right, we're testing the water. There's nothing wrong with what we have done. I was just thinking if we're going to go to the next step, to me, I would make that 50% of what you could do. I don't think we'll get out of, it's unmanageable to me. Obviously, staff thinks it is.
So how do we reword, what exactly is the rewording of the motion?
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I think it's 3 acres or 50% of the total commercial acreage allowed.
Correct.
I think it would be an
Which is
or.
limited to 30% of the total project.
Whichever is greater.
Whichever is greater.
I can live with that change.
Okay, thank you. We have a current motion with having been changed on the floor, ready to vote. Is that correct?
Mr.
The second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We need a
Charlie,
second.
were you the seconder? I'm sorry.
I
Would you accept the change?
And accepted by Mr. Redmond.
Okay. All right, gentlemen, it's time for us to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The change, all this does is move forward to the Board of County Commissioners, so just so we all realize that. Okay. Next item is Commissioners' matters. You just heard, no, we have none. Planning matters.
The only matter staff has is to offer congratulations to the new but well-seasoned vice chairman. That's it.
It's time for lunch. Okay.
Is
Attorney's
there a-
matters.
Will there be
None,
another
sir.
meeting in March?
No, there will not be a
Okay.
meeting on the 28th. We anticipate there will be a meeting in April, but we're not sure yet which meeting it would be.
Okay. Thank you all very much. We stand adjourned.